So, tropical update. Are things about to perk up in the tropics? And the answer is, well, it's that time of year where they should, according to our tropical cyclone activity chart here. Y'all are here. Friday's August 1st, so we're getting close to the 1st of August. And as you can see, there is a lot of hurricane season left, both in terms of time. Hurricane season ends at the end of November. Every now and then we get a December storm, but the season ends at the end of November. And in terms of numbers, it's usually most active between mid-August and mid-October in the Atlantic tropics. That's when we get more than half of our storms. So we would expect from a climatological standpoint that once we get to about the middle of August, that things should get more active and we should start seeing more storms forming. It's also true if you look at the points of origin. I've scrolled this down to the bottom. I got to scroll back up now. But anyway, going back to May and June, you don't see very many storms. This is for the entire historical record from 1851 to 2024, and none out in the tropical Atlantic. But as you go into June, you start to see more of those dots and tracks, and some of them start showing up over the tropical Atlantic, and you see more and more of them as you go through July over the years. But once you hit August, you see a bunch of them, and there's a ton of them at the end of August into September, all of September, and through October. So again, things start to slow down again once you get to the end of October and go into November. So again, from a climatological standpoint, we see more activity once you get to the middle of August. Now, what's happening right now? And the answer, once I get rid of this little window, is not much. And there's reasons for that. Number one, there really aren't any disturbances that are showing much sign of life. There's a tropical wave over here over the Western Caribbean, and you can see there's no thunderstorms with it. You can see there's another tropical wave with little to no shower and thunderstorm activity over the Eastern Caribbean Sea. Looking at a little farther east, well, there's an interesting looking kind of turning motion here over the middle of the tropical Atlantic, but it's not particularly well organized. And using this true color imagery, which, by the way, this is from the University of Wisconsin's Real Earth website, and this is the geocolor imagery. Our weather satellites that we have now have a sensor for red light and a sensor for blue light, and we can take a good guess at the green light from the data from one of the infrared sensors, and putting the red, blue, and green together, we can make a color satellite picture. So that's what we have here. And you notice this hazy kind of brownish area here over the area between 15 and 25 degrees north, going out to about 45 west and back to the African coastline. This is a Saharan dust storm that moved off of West Africa a couple of days ago. That indicates that we have a lot of dry air in that area. The dust itself isn't necessarily a problem for tropical storms and hurricanes, but the dry air is. They don't like that at all. And when you have a lot of dry air around, you're not going to see many storms form. Now, there's also one other thing that's worth talking about here, and it's something called the Madden-Julian Oscillation. That's something that you can spend a lot of time in a deep rabbit hole if you want to Google that term. But basically what the Madden-Julian Oscillation is a disturbance that typically forms over the Indian Ocean and Western Pacific region, Southeast Asia, and so forth, and drifts eastward in time, and eventually ends up over the Central Pacific and East Pacific, and eventually the Atlantic. Sometimes it goes all the way around the world and starts again, but it tends to weaken as it does track east. But anyway, this thing called the Madden-Julian Oscillation, it has two. We call it a dipole because it has two areas that have different effects. There's an area that enhances thunderstorms over the tropics, and in turn, tropical storms and hurricanes. And then there's an area that suppresses those tropical storms and hurricanes. I'll show you what that looks like on a graph here in a minute. But right now, we have the suppressing area like we have had for most of the summer so far, and the entire hurricane season so far. We've had that suppressing area over us, and you can even see that because the suppressing area is where you have a lot of sinking air. On the satellite picture, you can tell you have sinking air going on because if you look at the satellite picture here, notice how the normal trade winds are blowing here and carrying clouds westward. Trade winds blow from east to west. But look over here, the eastern part of the Atlantic, you have stuff moving the other direction. So air is flowing that way. taking the clouds with it. So that means that this disturbance right here is under sinking air, because that air has that when you have air flowing kind of out of an area, the air has to come from somewhere, so it's coming from above. So you have that sinking air, and that's suppressing this little disturbance here from developing. So what does that look like if you try to graph it on a map? This is, we call these velocity potential anomalies. I'm going to have to enlarge this so you can actually see it. The green areas are where you have upward motion. Actually, technically, it's where you have diverging air at the top of the atmosphere, which in turn indicates you have rising air, because that again, the air has to come from somewhere, and if you're near the top of the troposphere, it has to come from below mostly. So in this particular case, you have these green areas showing where you have essentially rising air, and the brown areas where you have sinking air. And this is back on the 17th of July, showing essentially what most of the summers and the hurricane seasons look like to this point. But as I advance this forward, notice that these brown areas are becoming less prevalent. Whoops, I went a little too far and we'll loop back to the beginning there. So let's go back to the most recent picture on the 28th of July. So we're starting to have some of those green areas come to this part of the world. And so if you look and see what's going on, where did I put it? There we are, the National Hurricane Center's map. Stuff's going on out by Hawaii. They got a hurricane out there.
In case Hawaii had nothing else going on.
Right. This Kelly, it's a post-tropical. It's falling apart now, but it was a tropical storm for a while. And they're watching one more disturbance out there for development. And then the Eastern Pacific, they're starting to pick up too. There's two areas to watch out there. One that looks like it's about to go, and then there's another that is moving in, but has not developed yet, not developed a circulation yet. So anyway, there's two areas they're going to be keeping an eye on over the next 7 days. Not much happening over the Atlantic right now, and they don't expect anything to happen for the next 7 days. But with our friend the Madden-Julian Oscillation starting to creep eastward toward the Atlantic basin, and also with things starting to change, and now they made this one way too big. I have to make this one smaller so you can see it again. This is the Climate Prediction Center's Global Tropical Hazards Outlook, which shows you week 2 from when they issue it on Tuesdays, and week 3. The red areas, the hatched areas, are a small chance of a tropical cyclone forming during weeks 2 or 3. And the solid areas are where you have higher chances, a 40 or 60% chance. And notice that they actually have some areas we need to watch right now. For example, you've heard we've got some cooler air coming our way, about to starting this weekend. That's because cold front's coming in. That's a good thing, except that there's a dark and sinister side to that when you have a front becomes stationary, as this one will, over the Gulf of Mexico and the southwestern Atlantic, that sometimes is a breeding ground. Remember Chantal? That's how Chantal happened. We had a front move in and become stationary, and low pressure formed along it, and it became Chantal. Well, there's a chance that could happen again once we get out to the time between the 6th and the 12th, according to the Climate Prediction Center, and something that I've been keeping an eye on. So I think there's an outside chance of that happening. It's something to watch for. It's a low chance. Again, it's their 20% or less area, but it's something we'll have to keep an eye on. And you see in their week 3 graphic here, which is for the 13th through the 19th of August, they're concerned that things will become more favorable over the tropical Atlantic and what we call the main development region between 10 and 20 degrees north. Things could become favorable enough for a tropical wave or two to actually get better organized with rising air in that part of the world instead of sinking air. So we'll have to keep an eye on that area once we get to mid-August.
Well, we have some good news, Frank. If I hop over to some of the tabs I've got open here, is that when we are talking about this development out there in the ocean, we learned this week from Michael Lowry and others that according to Navy spokespersons and NOAA spokespeople, an 11th hour decision has been made to keep data flowing from 3 weather satellites, due in part to all the critical feedback that scientists and others have been saying. You might recall a conversation on our show previously that we were going to lose access to some of this additional weather data that comes not from the main NOAA satellites, but to some military satellites that also provide some weather data. And so that was, I think, a bit of a relief for a lot of people this week, Frank.
Yeah, and I said hallelujah when I saw that, because that's data we need. It's one of the things that we use to diagnose what the infrastructure of a hurricane looks like. When we don't have the hurricane hunters flying around in there. And it also, that data gets fed into the models, and without that data, the models will not produce guidance that is as good as we've had. in recent years, which means the quality of our forecast would likely go down, especially when it comes to rapid intensification, which is something that we found it happens. And sometimes it happens close to shore as as a tropical storm or hurricanes moving in, and something that may have been a category 1 or even a tropical storm a couple of days ago suddenly become a category 4 or even 5. That's some important data, and it's a good thing that we are going to maintain access to it.
The more good data we can get our hands on, the better.